The briefing officer called Drevik a difficult personality. I called him something else, but not in the report. He was the Vorathi Compact's senior military envoy, which meant he was the man who had spent 6 weeks turning a ceasefire into a slow rearmament. Every session he would listen to our proposals with the flat patience of someone who has already decided the answer is no and is simply waiting for you to finish speaking. He had 3 bodyguards in full armor at all times, a personal translator he'd had fitted with a loyalty implant, and a documented history of having the previous 2 negotiators reassigned after they pushed too hard. I was the 3rd. They sent me because I was the least senior officer they could plausibly attach the rank of diplomatic liaison, first class, to without the Vorathi calling it an insult. I was 28. I had a degree in xenolinguistics, 14 months of field deployment, and Breck. Breck was 7 years old, 160 pounds, and English Mastiff from nose to tail. He had a fawn coat going grey at the muzzle, a head roughly the size of a small luggage case, and a disposition so even-tempered that the station veterinarian had once described him as geologically calm. He had been cleared as a support animal under the diplomatic access protocols, logged in the manifest as non-combatant auxiliary, handler bonded, and assigned a bunk width of floor space in my quarters that he immediately expanded by sleeping diagonally. The Vorathi handlers who processed us at the platform entry took one look at him and laughed. Not the polite kind. The kind where they don't bother lowering their voices. I heard the translator render it as, "The human brought a landslug." Breck sat beside me and yawned. It was a large yawn. He had a lot of teeth and he wasn't showing them. His mouth just opened very wide in the way of an animal that is deeply relaxed and faintly bored by everything in the room. He looked up at me. I looked back at him. He lay down on the platform deck, put his chin on his paws, and closed his eyes. The handlers stopped laughing after a moment, though I couldn't have told you exactly why. The staging platform had been a cargo level before the compact requisitioned it. You could still see the maglock anchor points in the floor where the freight containers had Saturday. They'd put down grey composite paneling over the worst of it and called it a conference hall. There were no windows. The lighting was Verada calibrated, which meant it ran about 30% dimmer than I preferred and had a faint blue-violet cast that gave everything a slightly bruised look. We met for 4 hours the first day. Drevik sat across the table from me with his translator standing behind his left shoulder, and he listened to our position on the contested transit corridor with the expression of a man watching rain. Then he restated the compact's position, which was the same as it had been for 6 weeks, and suggested we reconvene in the morning. Breck lay under the table the entire session. At one point, one of the Vorathi junior aides crouched to look at him, I think out of some combination of fascination and nerves, and Breck opened one eye, assessed the aide, and closed it again. The aide sat back down very quickly. The second day was the same. Third day, same. The pattern became clear by the end of the first week. Drevik was not here to negotiate. He was here to occupy the timeline while the compact moved assets. I filed the assessment to Fleet Command. Fleet Command sent back a note that read, essentially, keep talking. I kept talking. Breck kept sleeping. The 4th week, Drevik started testing edges. Small things at first. He arrived late. He had his bodyguards stand closer to my side of the table. He interrupted the translator mid-sentence twice, which the translator, loyalty implant notwithstanding, visibly did not enjoy. He brought a second aide who did nothing but take notes and stare at me. I matched his pace. I arrived at the same time regardless of when he showed. I sat down, opened my case, took out my water flask, and worked through the agenda. Breck lay under the table. Week 5, Drevik began making observations about human physical capacity. He framed them as curiosity. We had heard humans were quite resilient. Is it accurate that your pain thresholds are lower than reported? But the framing was a courtesy he was barely bothering with. I answered factually. I did not take the bait. Week 6, the compact moved 3 additional vessels into the contested corridor. Fleet Command flagged it as a ceasefire violation and sent a formal protest. Drevik, when I raised it in session, smiled. It was the first expression I had seen on his face in 6 weeks that reached his eyes. He said, through the translator, the vessels are conducting environmental surveys. The corridor is not military space under the current Accord's precise wording. You may wish to review the wording. I had reviewed the wording. He was, technically, correct. I said I would note his position and we could reconvene the following morning. That afternoon, walking back to my quarters, I sat down on a supply crate in a side corridor and put my hand on Breck's back for a while. He leaned into me. He was very warm and very solid, and he smelled like dog, which is one of the better smells in existence. I did not write anything in my personal log that evening. The incident happened on the morning of day 41. We had broken for a session recess, standard 15 minutes. The Vorathi used it to consult privately, and I used it to drink water and read back through my notes. Drevika's bodyguards had stepped out. The junior aide was at the far end of the room. The translator was near the door. Drevik walked around the table. I didn't fully process the movement until he was close, and then he hit me, an open-handed strike across the face, hard enough that I went sideways against the table edge and my flask hit the floor. Not a combat move. A message. The kind of thing a man does when he wants you to understand that the conversation you've been having was never a conversation at all, and that the next step is whatever he decides it is. I straightened up. My ears were ringing. I could taste copper. Breck had been asleep under the table. He wasn't anymore. I heard him rise. Not a scramble, not a lunge, just the unhurried movement of 160 pounds of dog getting to his feet. He came out from under the table and stood beside me. He was not growling. He was not showing his teeth. He was simply standing and looking at Drevik, and his eyes were very calm and very direct in the way of an animal that has made a quiet internal calculation and is now in no particular hurry. I said, "Leave it." Breck looked at me. I said it again, quietly. "Leave it." He looked back at Drevik. Then he sat down, leaned against my leg, and put his chin on his knee. Drevik had not moved. He was looking at Breck in a way I hadn't seen him look at anything in 6 weeks, a stillness that was not his usual practice patience but something older and less considered. The junior aide, across the room, had gone very quiet. The translator was watching from the doorway. I picked up my water flask from the floor. I set it on the table. I sat back down in my chair. "When you're ready," I said, "we can continue." We did not continue that session. Drevik left the room. His aide left. The bodyguards, when they returned, took one look at the configuration. Drevik in the corridor, me at the table, Breck sitting at my side looking at nothing in particular, and left again. The translator lingered for a moment, then bowed, very slightly, and followed. I sat there for about 20 minutes. Breck put his head in my lap. I drank my water. Fleet Command sent a message at the 3-hour mark. Status? I sent back. Recess extended. Stand by. The Compact's communications channel opened at hour 5. Not Drevik. A junior administrator named Sitharavel, who introduced herself with 3 separate honorifics and spoke in a voice that was working very hard to be pleasant. She asked if we might revisit the session schedule. She asked if there were any additional accommodations the human delegation required. She asked, and here her voice took on a careful, practiced neutrality, whether the support animal would be present for future sessions. I said yes, the support animal would be present. Breck was handler bonded. He went where I went. There was a pause. Sitharavel said she would relay that information to the appropriate parties and looked forward to productive dialogue. Drevik did not return to the table. Sitharavel showed up the next morning with 2 junior aides and a revised framework document that addressed, to varying degrees, every outstanding position we had tabled in 6 weeks. She was polite, prepared, and moved through the agenda at a pace I had stopped expecting from this negotiation. We signed the transit corridor accord in 4 hours. The bodyguards were not present. Sitharavel's aides were not armed. At one point during a formatting break, one of the aides crouched down and extended a hand toward Breck in what I recognized as an attempt at greeting. Breck sniffed it. The aide made a sound I couldn't classify and sat back down looking very thoughtful. I initialed the last page. Sitharavel initialed it. We exchanged the formal copy packets. She looked at Breck for a long moment before she left, in the way of someone trying to solve a problem they hadn't expected to encounter. I didn't explain. The accord didn't require it. The after-action report, filed by Fleet Command, not by me, listed the resolution as attributable to sustained diplomatic pressure and a shift in compact internal politics. Drevik was noted as having withdrawn from active negotiations due to schedule conflicts. The accord was assessed as a satisfactory outcome. Breck was listed in the manifest appendix as support animal, non-combatant, returned to handler's quarters post-mission without incident. I read that line twice. He was asleep on my bunk when I finished reading, taking up approximately 70% of the available space and snoring with the easy authority of an animal that has done what it came to do and sees no need to discuss the matter further. His muzzle was grey. His paws were the size of my hands. In 6 weeks on that platform he had bitten no one, threatened no one, and made no sound that could be classified as aggressive. He had simply stood up, once, and looked at a man, and waited to see what I would say. I had said leave it. He had left it. The room had emptied anyway. I turned off the light and lay down on the narrow strip of bunk he'd left me, and put my hand on his back, and he sighed once, the long, contented exhale of a dog that is warm and full and exactly where he belongs, and I thought that the fleet could call it whatever they wanted in the report. Breck and I both knew what had happened in that room.